Honors Algebra 2. These are notes for Thursday, 3/19. This first slide is not on your notes page, so you might want to put it on your own paper and put it somewhere where you can refer back to it so that you can refer back to it when you need it and have it handy. These are the things we can use to help us do these problems without a calculator. Okay, so we're developing all these things all these tools we can use, so we'll call this our toolbox. Now, what are the tools we can use? Well, our two triangles, the layout of our two triangles. Okay, opposite of 30 is a 1, opposite of 60 is a square root of 3, opposite of 90 is a 2. Our 45, 45, 90, opposite our 45s are 1, opposite our 90s is a square root of 2. We also have, again with those right triangles, SOHCAHTOA would be in our toolbox. I'm shuffling papers around here, hold on. Okay, what else do we have in our toolbox? We have the unit circle, 1, 0, 0, 1, -1, 0, and 0, -1. And in the unit circle, remember how this goes. Sine of theta is equal to y, cosine of theta is equal to x, tangent of theta is equal to y over x. Easy way to remember that. Sine, cosine comes first, it gets x, sine gets y, then these two drop down to make that fraction. Okay. Now another thing we have in our triangle, or in our toolbox, is all students take calculus, where everything is positive at. Okay, everything's positive in the first, only the sine is positive in the second, everything else is negative, only the tangent in the third, and only the cosine in the fourth. We also know that what the answers our calculator gives us. When the calculator is doing a sine or a tangent problem, it will give us answers in either the first or the second quadrant. It'll give us the first quadrant if they are positive, first or fourth quadrant. First quadrant if they're positive, fourth quadrant if they're negative. Okay, so that means the calculator for a sine and tangent problem will give us answers between -90 degrees and positive 90 degrees, or negative pi over 2 and pi over 2 if we're in radians. Now for the cosine, it's a little different. So you got to remember this. With the cosine, the calculator will give us answers in either the first or the second, because the cosine is positive in the first and it's negative in the second. Okay, that's only for the cosine. So for the cosine, the calculator gives us answers from 0 degrees to 180, or from 0 radians to pi radians. So we have all these things in our toolbox that we need to be able to reference back. We need to know these. So make yourself a good copy of them and look back at it from time to time. We're going to use these today. Okay. All right, here we go. First problem. Name two angles such that theta is between 0 and 360, but they both have a sine value of 1/2. So how are we going to do this using the tools we have in our toolbox? Now, the first thing we would say is that this value is positive, and we're doing a sine. So where is the sine positive at? Well, all students take calculus. It's positive in the first and the second. That's why we can get two answers to this, two angles. Okay. Next thing we got to do is we got to say that means the sine, what we're being asked here is the sine of what angle equals 1/2. Well, the sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So now you got to start thinking in your head, which of our triangles has, or what angle has an opposite of 1 and a hypotenuse of 2? Well, that would be, what would that be? Well, the 30 has a side opposite of 1, and the 90, and the hypotenuse is 2. So that's how we would get our 1/2. So our angle theta we're looking for here is 30 degrees. Now that would be a 30-degree angle in the first quadrant, 30-degree reference angle in the second quadrant. So our two answers here, are two angles. We have a first quadrant angle of 30 degrees. We have a second quadrant angle of 180 minus 30, 150 degrees. Okay. All right, this next section we got here, we got 7 examples. We're going to try to do these without a calculator, and we're going to give answers in degrees and radians. Now, first off, for radians, remember, pi and 180 are the same thing, okay? So, if I take 180 divided by 3, that's an answer of 60. So that's equal to, that's equal to 60 degrees. So the way you think about this is, if I have a 60-degree angle, what is that in radians? Well, 180 divided by 60 is 3, so that's pi over 3. If it was a 30-degree angle, what's 180 divided by 30? 6, so that's pi over 6. What's our 45? Well, 180 divided by 45 is 4. 2 45s make a 90 and 2 90s make 180, so that's 4 45, so that's pi over 4. That'll help you with your conversions between degrees and radians. You're just dividing 180 by whatever you need to, okay? So let's put that to work here. Inverse sine of square root of 2 over 2. Remember what this is asking you. This is saying when you take the sine of an angle, you're going to get square root of 2 over 2. Okay, so how does that happen? So now, well, you got to think opposite over hypotenuse is square root of 2 over 2. How will that happen? Or where will that happen? Well, with a 45-degree angle, opposite is a 1 and hypotenuse is square root of 2. When you rationalize that, there is your square root of 2 over 2. So that means we're talking about a 45-degree angle. Now we just got to figure out where. Well, since this is a positive value, where will the calculator give us an answer at? Well, first off, for the sine, it's going to be either the first or the fourth. Since the sine is positive, then that means it will be in the first quadrant. So our 45-degree angle would be in the first quadrant. And in the first quadrant, that means our answer is 45. What about in radians? What is 180 divided by 45? Pi over 4. Okay. Second tangent equals -1. So that means we're taking a tangent of an angle and we're getting an answer of 1. So that means our opposite over our adjacent was a 1. So think about your two triangles. Which one has an opposite and an adjacent that would give you a positive 1? That would be a 45 again. Okay, opposite 1, adjacent 1. So that means we're using a 45-degree angle. Now, the calculator will give us an answer of 45. Now the tangent can be, an answer from the calculator for a tangent could be in the first or the fourth quadrant. So that means that 45-degree angle could be either place. Now, if it's in the fourth, the calculator would tell us -45. Well, which one do we have here? Since that's +1, then we're dealing with the first quadrant angle. So again, we get an answer like the first problem of 45 or pi over 4. Secant. What's secant the reciprocal of? Quick. Cosine. So that means, and this is -2 over 1, so what's the reciprocal of that? -1/2. So these two would be the same problem. Okay. Now, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So start thinking in your head, how can I get a +1/2? Don't worry about the negative. How can I get a +1/2 when I do an adjacent over hypotenuse? What has an adjacent of 1 and a hypotenuse of 2? What would that be? It would be the 60, because the square root of 3 is over there. So adjacent is 1, hypotenuse is 2. So we got a 60-degree reference angle. Now the cosine is negative. So what's the calculator going to do for a cosine? It'll give you an answer in the first quadrant if the cosine is positive, but it will give you an answer in the second quadrant if it's negative. So that means there would have been a 60-degree reference angle over here. That would not have been what the calculator would give you. What would the calculator give you? 120. All right, cosine, second cosine of 3, or 3 over 1. And if it's a cosine, we're thinking adjacent over hypotenuse. Now, if you start thinking about your two triangles, 45, 45, 90 is 1, 1, square root of 2. 30, 60, 90 is 60. 30 is be 1, square root of 3, and a 2. Can anybody see any combination there that would give me 3 over 1? Well, the answer is there isn't one. There's no combination here that will give me 3 over 1. So the answer to this is no solution. Undefined. Okay. Actually, not undefined. It'd be no solution. And if you punch this into your calculator, let me do that real quick. It should give us an error message. Yes, that's what our calculators would do. They would give us an error message, and we'll go whenever we talk about the graphs of sine, cosine, and tangent. We'll go into this problem and why it is no solution or an error message on our calculator in a little more depth. Okay. All right. Now with sine and cosine, we're equal to a 1 on both of these. I know this one over here says -1, but you're thinking like it's a 1. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. If you think about your two triangles, which I still have drawn over here, is there any way to get an opposite and hypotenuse that's equal to 1? The answer is no. But with sine and cosine, then, what we have to do is you have to think unit circle instead. Okay? And on the unit circle, what is the sine equal to? It's equal to my y value. So where on this unit circle do we have a y value that is equal to 1? Right there. 90 degrees. Okay. 180 divided by 90 is 2, so in radians that's pi over 2. Cosine equal to -1. That's adjacent over hypotenuse. Again, if you looked at your triangles, you wouldn't be able to find it. So what do? Well, think about an alternative way to find the cosine. On a unit circle, the cosine is equal to x. So this becomes a little game here of where is x equal to -1? Well, on our unit circle, x is equal to -1 right there. -1 comma 0. What is that? That is 180 degrees, or pi radians. When is the tangent undefined? Okay. Remember, an undefined fraction has a 0 in the denominator, so if you try to use your 45, 45, or 30, 60, you're never going to be able to get a 0 in the denominator. So what's another way to think of tangent? Unit circle, it's y over x. So if this fraction is going to be undefined, then that means there needs to be a 0 in our denominator. So now it just becomes a question of where on the unit circle is x equal to 0? Well, two places. 90, which is 0, 1, and -90, or 270, which is 0, -1. And we know that for a tangent, the calculator will give us an answer either in the first or the fourth quadrant. So we would think the calculator would either tell us 90 or -90. Which one do you think it would be, the positive or the negative? It would be the positive. And dividing 180 by 90, this in the radians would be pi over 2. Okay. Last problem. All right, solve for theta if cosine is -2/3. So the first thing I see is a cosine that is negative. Okay, so I would say to myself, where could that be? Wouldn't be in the first, wouldn't be in the fourth. It'd be either in the second quadrant or the third. Well, let's keep reading on here. And theta has to be between 90 and 180. So they do the work for us. They tell us it has to be in the third quadrant. So that means we need to find an angle over here. Did I say third quadrant? I meant second quadrant. Over here in the second quadrant. Now, when we go to find our reference angle, and we say theta would be inverse cosine of negative 2/3, it gives us, what does it give us here? Let's see, 131.8. Okay, so what did the calculator do? The calculator knew we needed to go the second quadrant, so it did not give us this reference angle down here. It actually gave us our answer of 131.8 degrees. Okay, so I hope this is clearing some things up in this section.